In 1921, Tulsa's Greenwood district was so prosperous it was called Black Wall Street. Then white mobs, supported by local government, burned 35 city blocks to the ground, killing hundreds. The kicker? It was erased from textbooks for 70-plus years. Before we dive deeper into how this entire world was erased, take a second to subscribe. It helps us keep uncovering the parts of history they tried to hide. This was Black Wall Street, a city within a city, built on a foundation of ambition and community. Over 35 square blocks of black-owned prosperity. We're talking hotels, movie theaters, and restaurants, doctors, lawyers, and dentists. It had its own schools, its own hospital, its own library, its own newspapers. This was the Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma, a living testament to black success, built from the ground up by the children and grandchildren of slaves. It was a thriving, self-sufficient world that Booker T. Washington himself called Negro Wall Street. It was a symbol of what was possible, and it was all burned to the ground, destroyed in less than 24 hours. All because of a lie. A lie that started in an elevator. Chapter 1. The Genesis of a Dream. To understand how Greenwood could be so completely erased, you first have to understand why it even existed. The story doesn't begin in Tulsa. It starts decades earlier, in the ashes of the Civil War. The promise of Reconstruction, a period meant to integrate newly freed African Americans into the country, had failed across the South. In its place rose the brutal system of Jim Crow laws, a kind of state-sponsored apartheid designed to enforce segregation and crush the black vote. But in this era of oppression, a strange opportunity opened up in what was then called Indian Territory, the land that would become Oklahoma. For generations, this land was home to Native American tribes, and some had been slave owners. After the Civil War, their former slaves, known as freedmen, were granted land and tribal citizenship. This, plus a series of land runs, drew thousands of African Americans from the Deep South. They were chasing the rumor of a better life, a place where a black person could own land, build a home, and decide their own destiny, far from the suffocating racism they had always known. They founded dozens of all-black towns across Oklahoma, creating self-governing communities as a shield against a hostile world. It was a movement born from both necessity and radical hope. While most of these towns were small farming communities, one chapter of a booming oil town called Tulsa was destined for something much bigger. That district was Greenwood, and it would become a national symbol of black economic power. Chapter 2. Building the Mecca. The architect of this dream was a man named O.W. Gurley, the son of former slaves from Arkansas. Gurley was a visionary who showed up during the 1905 land run. He bought a 40-acre tract of land with a single powerful idea: build a community for black people, by black people. He started with a boarding house, the very first business in what would become Greenwood. Then he started selling land exclusively to other African Americans. His vision was contagious. Soon, another entrepreneur, J.B. Stratford, who had a law degree from Indiana University, came to Tulsa. Like Gurley, he saw the potential for a self-sufficient black economy. He built the Stratford Hotel, a 54-room luxury establishment that was said to be the largest black-owned hotel in the country. It was a crown jewel in a rapidly growing kingdom. By 1921, Greenwood was a bustling, vibrant metropolis. It was home to over 10,000 residents and more than 190 businesses, sprawling across an incredible 35 square blocks. The streets were lined with grocery stores, clothing shops, and billiard halls. There were 2 movie theaters, including the 800-seat Dreamland Theater, owned by the Williams family. There were multiple churches, 2 schools, a public library, and a black-owned hospital. The district had its own 2 newspapers, the Tulsa Star and the Oklahoma Sun, keeping the community connected. The success was just staggering. Professional offices housed black doctors, dentists, and lawyers serving their own people. Men like Simon Barry built a fortune running a private bus line and a charter plane service, catering to wealthy white oil barons and reinvesting his profits right back into Greenwood. It was this incredible concentration of black wealth that earned it its famous nickname, Black Wall Street. Chapter 3. A Self-Sufficient World. The real genius of Black Wall Street wasn't just the number of businesses, it was the world they created. In an America where segregation was law, Greenwood flipped the script. The very Jim Crow laws designed to oppress them had an ironic side effect. They forced black dollars to stay within the black community. It's said that a dollar circulated in Greenwood as many as 36 to 100 times before it ever left the neighborhood. That money would pass from a resident to a grocer, from the grocer to a farmer, from the farmer to a mechanic, and on and on. This created a virtuous cycle of prosperity. The community was built on a culture of mutual support. Because black entrepreneurs were often denied loans from white banks, they created their own informal credit systems, lending to each other to start new businesses. This wasn't just business, it was a collective act of defiance. Every new home, every new diploma, every new shop was a declaration that they would not be limited by the racism surrounding them. Imagine walking down Greenwood Avenue on a spring evening in 1920. You'd hear jazz spilling out of nightclubs, smell food from dozens of restaurants, and feel the buzz of a community confident in its own success. This wasn't just a collection of buildings, it was a source of deep pride. It was a place where you could see your own reflection in the faces of business owners and community leaders. It was a fortress of black achievement in a deeply hostile world. And that success was breeding a dangerous resentment just across the railroad tracks in White Tulsa. Chapter 4. The Elevator Incident. The spark that lit the fuse came on Memorial Day, May 30th, 1921. A 19-year-old black shoeshiner named Dick Rowland needed to use the restroom. The only public restroom for black people downtown was on the top floor of the Drexel Building. Rowland walked in and stepped into the elevator, which was operated by a 21-year-old white woman named Sarah Page. To this day, nobody knows exactly what happened in that elevator. The most credible account suggests that Rowland stumbled as the elevator lurched and accidentally stepped on Page's foot or brushed her arm. She let out a scream. A clerk in a nearby store heard it, saw Rowland run out of the elevator, and immediately assumed the absolute worst. He called the police and reported an assault. The details were never clear. In fact, Sarah Page herself later told police she hadn't been assaulted and didn't want to press charges. But in the charged atmosphere of 1920s America, the truth didn't matter. The mere accusation of a black man touching a white woman was a potential death sentence, and rumor, more powerful than fact, began to spread like wildfire. With every telling, the story got more twisted, turning an awkward moment into a tale of a vicious attack. Chapter 5. The Lie Takes Flight. By the next day, May 31st, the story had reached the Tulsa Tribune. Looking to sell papers, the Tribune ran a sensational front-page article, "Nab Negro for Attacking Girl in Elevator." But it was a second piece in that same edition, an editorial, that poured gasoline on the fire. Though all known copies of that editorial were later destroyed, witness accounts confirm its chilling message. It recapped the alleged attack and ended with a clear suggestion that Dick Rowland should be lynched that night. This wasn't just irresponsible journalism. It was a direct call to violence. The newspaper had weaponized a rumor, giving it the stamp of authority. The manufactured outrage exploded. The paper hit the streets in the afternoon, and by evening, the lie had done its work. It was a rallying cry, turning simmering resentment into a murderous mob with a clear target. Chapter 6. The Gathering Storm. After the paper hit the streets, Dick Rowland was arrested and taken to the jail on the top floor of the Tulsa County Courthouse. As evening fell, a white mob started gathering on the courthouse lawn. At first, it was a few hundred, but their numbers quickly swelled, fueled by the Tribune's report. They were angry, and they were there to see a lynching. News of the mob raced back to Greenwood. The community knew exactly what this meant. Lynchings were a common tool of racial terror. But Greenwood also had a large population of World War I veterans, men who had fought for democracy overseas and weren't about to stand by and watch a man be murdered without a trial. A group of about 25 armed black men, some of them veterans, went to the courthouse not to start a fight, but to prevent one. They offered to help the sheriff protect Rowland. The sheriff turned them away, saying he had it under control. The men returned to Greenwood, but as the white mob outside the courthouse grew to nearly 2,000, they knew the sheriff's words meant nothing. A second, larger group of about 75 armed black men went back. They were determined to show that there would be no lynching in their city. Their presence was a bold statement against mob rule. Chapter 7. The first shots. The air outside the courthouse was electric. The white mob, seeing the armed black men, grew even more agitated. The sheriff pleaded with everyone to go home, but it was far too late. The standoff was a powder keg. The spark came when a white man tried to disarm one of the black veterans. The veteran refused. A struggle broke out, and in the chaos, a shot was fired. Pandemonium. It's unclear who fired first, but that single shot unleashed a barrage of gunfire. The outnumbered black men, facing a mob that was now thousands strong, began a strategic retreat back toward Greenwood, firing to cover their escape. The white mob, now bloodthirsty, chased after them. The massacre had begun. Chapter 8. The Invasion of Greenwood. As the black defenders fell back across the railroad tracks that divided the city, the white mob morphed into an invading army. They weren't just random citizens anymore. Some had been deputized by Tulsa police officers and told to get a gun and get a nigger. They broke into armories and hardware stores, arming themselves to the teeth. They surged into Greenwood. First, they looted, shattering windows and hauling out whatever they could carry. But looting quickly turned to arson and murder. They shot at any black person they saw. People sleeping in their beds were jolted awake by gunfire and breaking glass. The initial defense of Greenwood was fierce. Residents took up positions in their homes and businesses, fighting for their lives, their families, and the world they had built. For hours, they held back the invaders. But they were desperately outnumbered and outgunned. The mob was now being supplied and supported by city authorities who should have been protecting them. Chapter 9. The Fire from the Sky. When the sun rose on the morning of June 1st, the full horror became clear. This was no longer a riot. It was a systematic, military-style invasion. A train whistle at dawn was reportedly the signal for an all-out assault. The mob, now as large as 10,000 people, poured into Greenwood from all sides. They began setting fires methodically, block by block, using kerosene-soaked rags to set homes and businesses ablaze. When firefighters arrived, the mob either turned them away at gunpoint or forced them to protect white-owned properties on the edge of the district. And then came the attack from the air. Multiple survivors gave sworn testimony that they saw airplanes flying low over Greenwood. They described these planes not just doing reconnaissance, but dropping turpentine bombs and incendiary devices onto rooftops, spreading the fire faster than anyone could escape. They also reported being shot at from the planes. This was one of the first, if not the first, times American soil was bombed from the air. The result was an apocalypse. The carefully built world of Black Wall Street was consumed by a firestorm. The Dreamland Theater, the luxurious Stratford Hotel, the newspaper offices, the churches, the hospital. All of it was engulfed in flames. The smoke blotted out the sun, and the district became a killing field. Chapter 10. The Human Toll. For the thousands of black residents trapped in Greenwood, it was a night of unimaginable terror. Families were torn apart in the chaos. People were shot down as they fled their burning homes. The mob showed no mercy. They killed men, women, and children. In one of the most harrowing accounts, Dr. A.C. Jackson, a nationally renowned black surgeon, surrendered to a group of white men. He came out of his house with his hands in the air. They shot and killed him on his front lawn. As the violence raged, the Oklahoma National Guard was called in. But instead of stopping the white mob, they focused on rounding up the black survivors. Over 6,000 black men, women, and children were marched at gunpoint to makeshift internment camps at the convention hall and the fairgrounds. They were held for days, prisoners in their own city, while the world they had built was reduced to ash and rubble. By midday on June 1st, it was over. The official death toll was listed as 36. But historians today believe as many as 300 people were killed, the vast majority of them black. Over 1,200 homes were gone. An entire thriving community, 35 square blocks of black prosperity, had been wiped off the map. Chapter 11. A City in Ashes. When the smoke finally cleared, Greenwood looked like a war zone because it had been one. The 6,000 black residents held in internment camps had nothing to go home to. They were homeless, stripped of their property and their savings. Almost immediately, the cover-up began. City leaders and the media, the same groups that helped incite the violence, started controlling the narrative. They called it a race riot, a term that deliberately hides the truth. A riot suggests a two-sided conflict. This wasn't a riot. This was a massacre. The term riot also had a cynical legal purpose. Most insurance policies had clauses that voided coverage in the case of a riot. Not a single black property owner could successfully file a claim. Then, a grand jury was convened. In a grotesque twist of justice, it blamed the black community for the violence, concluding that the men who went to the courthouse to prevent a lynching were the ones at fault. Not one white person was ever held accountable for the murder, arson, or looting. The lie that started in the elevator was now the official story. Chapter 12. The Betrayal of Justice. The destruction of Greenwood wasn't just physical. The economic losses were staggering, estimated at over $1.5 million at the time, which is the equivalent of tens of millions of dollars today. Survivors filed lawsuits to get compensation, but every single one was dismissed. The insurance companies systematically denied all claims. To make things worse, the city passed a new fire ordinance that made it impossibly expensive for residents to rebuild, requiring fireproof materials they could no longer afford. It was a clear attempt to push the black community out for good and seize the valuable land. In a final, devastating blow, the Oklahoma Supreme Court in 2024 dismissed a lawsuit brought by the last two living survivors of the massacre, Viola Fletcher and Leslie Benningfield Randall, both over 109 years old. Their lawsuit sought reparations for the century of harm. The court's decision effectively ended one of the last legal paths for justice, a painful reminder that for the victims of Greenwood, justice has been denied for over a century. Chapter 13. The Unbreakable Spirit of Rebirth. But the story of Greenwood does not end in the ashes. In one of the most incredible displays of resilience in American history, the community refused to die. Despite the city blocking them at every turn, and with zero help from insurance or the government, the people of Greenwood began to rebuild. Led by figures like B.C. Franklin, a prominent lawyer, residents fought the new zoning laws in court and won. Living in Red Cross tents and makeshift shacks, they started from scratch. They salvaged what they could from the rubble and began rebuilding their homes and businesses, brick by brick. The fire did not destroy the spirit of Black Wall Street. By 1922, just 1 year after the massacre, more than 80 businesses were back up and running. By 1925, the National Negro Business League held its annual conference in a rebuilt Greenwood, a stunning testament to the community's recovery. In fact, by the early 1940s, Greenwood was once again a thriving hub with over 240 black-owned businesses, even more than it had before the massacre. It was a miraculous rebirth, powered by sheer will. Chapter 14. The Slow Decline and Historical Erasure. The second destruction of Greenwood wasn't caused by fire and guns. It was done with bulldozers and highways. Ironically, the desegregation movement of the 1950s and 60s began to erode Greenwood's self-contained economy. As black residents were finally able to shop in other parts of Tulsa, the dollar that once circulated dozens of times inside Greenwood began to leak out. But the final blow came in the name of urban renewal. In the late 1960s, the city routed a major highway, Interstate 244, straight through the heart of Greenwood. It demolished homes and businesses, physically tearing the community apart. What the mob failed to do permanently in 1921, city planners accomplished decades later. Alongside this physical destruction was a campaign of silence. For most of the 20th century, the Tulsa Race Massacre was actively suppressed. It wasn't taught in schools. Newspaper articles about it were scrubbed from the archives. For generations, an entire city and an entire nation just pretended it never happened. It became a secret, kept alive only by the survivors and their families. It wasn't until 1997, 76 years later, that the state of Oklahoma finally formed a commission to investigate the massacre. Today, institutions like the Greenwood Rising History Center stand on the ground where it all happened, dedicated to telling the story that was silenced for so long. The story of Greenwood is a story that they tried to bury. Its rediscovery is a credit to the survivors who refused to let it be forgotten. That's why it's so important that we share it. If you believe this piece of American history needs to be heard, please share this with someone you know. The fight to preserve this memory is happening right now. And to continue learning about the hidden histories that shape our world, make sure you subscribe. Conclusion. The story of Black Wall Street is a profound American tragedy. It's about a proud and prosperous community shattered by a lie. A lie that was never the real reason. The real reason was the hate and jealousy that the success of Black Wall Street provoked. The lie was just the excuse a mob needed to destroy a symbol of black achievement they couldn't stand. But to remember Greenwood only for its destruction is to miss the point. It must be remembered for what it was, a beacon of hope and a model of self-sufficiency. And it must be remembered for its incredible rebirth, a story of a people who, facing unimaginable devastation, found the strength to rebuild. The history of Greenwood is a warning about how easily hate can be manufactured and how fragile justice can be. But it's also a powerful lesson in the indomitable nature of the human spirit. The story of Black Wall Street isn't over. It's still being written every time we choose to remember, every time we speak its name, and every time we refuse to let it be forgotten.